He walked slowly through the cemetery, each step heavier than the last. The sky was gray and the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the smell of wet earth. He held a small bouquet of flowers in his hand, their colors bright against the dull, cold ground. He had been here many times before, but today felt different. Today felt like he needed more than just a visit. Today he needed to feel close to his father, even if it was just for a moment. As he approached the grave, memories came rushing back. He remembered the last time he had seen his father alive, sitting in the living room with a tired smile. He had wanted to say so many things that day, but the words had stuck in his throat. Now standing here, he wished he could go back and tell him everything he had never said. The grief he carried felt heavier than ever. It was a weight that had settled on his chest years ago, and had never lifted. He knelt by the grave, placing the flowers gently on the freshly turned soil. His fingers lingered on the small stone, tracing the engraved letters of his father's name. It was hard to believe he was really gone. The world kept moving, people kept living, but he had been left behind to carry the emptiness. "I don't know if you can hear me," he whispered, his voice trembling, "but I needed to see you, to talk to you, even if it's just in my head." He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the tears that had been building for years began to fall. He let them come, letting the grief flow freely for the first time in a long while. The wind moved through the trees, making the leaves rustle. It almost felt like the cemetery was alive, watching him, holding him in a strange kind of comfort. He remembered the times his father had taken him here as a child, pointing out the different trees, telling him stories about people buried long ago. Those memories were warm, but they also hurt because they reminded him of all the moments he would never have again. He stayed there for a long time, talking to his father about the small things in life, the things he wished he could share with him. He spoke about his job, his friends, his struggles, and his small victories. It was strange to speak to someone who was no longer there, but in some way it felt right. He felt the weight on his chest lighten just a little, as if talking to his father gave him some peace. The cemetery was quiet, almost eerily so. He could hear the distant sound of a car on the road outside, the soft chirping of birds and the occasional rustle of animals moving through the underbrush. But for the most part it was silent, and that silence was both comforting and painful. It gave him space to think, to remember, to grieve. He thought about all the things he wished he could have done differently. The arguments that never happened, the words left unsaid, the moments he had taken for granted. He wished he could go back and be a better son, but he knew that was impossible. All he could do now was honor his father's memory and the way he lived his life. As he sat there, lost in his thoughts, he noticed the small details around him, the way the sunlight filtered through the clouds, the way the flowers on nearby graves swayed gently in the wind, the way the earth smelled after the rain. These small things reminded him that life continued, even in the presence of death. It was a harsh reminder, but also a comforting one, that the world still held beauty and moments worth living for. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. He imagined his father's voice, gentle and warm, telling him everything would be okay. He imagined the laughter they shared, the lessons learned, the love that never faded. It was a bittersweet feeling, a mixture of sorrow and comfort, but it reminded him that his father was still with him in a way, in his memories and the lessons he had taught, in the love that had never left. Time seemed to stand still as he sat there, lost in the memories and the grief. He didn't notice how long he had been there, how the wind had picked up, how the clouds had shifted. All he knew was that he needed this moment, this connection, this chance to feel close to his father one more time. He whispered more words, telling his father about the dreams he had, the fears he faced, the people he loved. He spoke honestly without holding back, because here, in this quiet place, he could be himself completely. He felt a strange sense of release, as if the act of speaking aloud was lifting some of the burden he had carried for so long. The flowers he had placed began to wilt slightly in the cool air, but he didn't mind. They were a symbol, a small token of his love, and that was enough for now. He ran his fingers over the small stone again, feeling the smooth surface beneath his fingertips. It was cold but grounding. It reminded him that even though his father was gone, he had been real, and he had left a mark that would never fade. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the cemetery, he finally stood up. He looked around one last time, taking in the quiet beauty of the place, the stillness that surrounded him, and the memories that filled his heart. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs, and then turned to leave. But as he walked away, there was a strange sense of being watched, a feeling that he was not completely alone. He shook his head, telling himself it was just his imagination, that it was the wind, the rustling leaves, or the way his mind worked when it was full of grief. He tried to push the thought aside, focusing on the path ahead, the life he still had to live, and the ways he could honor his father moving forward. Even as he left the cemetery, he carried the connection with him, the memories, the grief, the love. It all traveled with him, a quiet presence that reminded him of where he came from and who he had lost. And though the weight of sorrow remained, it was lighter now, softened by the act of remembrance, by the act of speaking to the man he had loved and lost. He promised himself that he would return, that he would continue to talk to his father, to remember him, and to carry his lessons forward. It was a promise born out of love, sorrow, and a desire to keep the memory alive. As he walked away, the wind carried a soft whisper through the trees, and for a brief moment he felt a strange comfort, as if someone or something was listening. He was walking slowly away from the grave when he thought he heard something. At first he told himself it was just the wind, the rustling of leaves, or perhaps a bird flying by. But then he heard it again, this time more clearly. It was a voice, soft and gentle, calling his name. He stopped in his tracks, his heart beating faster, a cold shiver running down his spine. It sounded so familiar, so comforting, yet so impossible. He looked around, eyes scanning the rows of graves, the trees, and the shadows stretching across the cemetery. There was no one there, just the wind, the grass, and the quiet stillness of the place. Yet the voice lingered in his mind, echoing softly. "It can't be real," he whispered to himself. "It must be my imagination." But as he tried to convince himself, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The hairs on his arms stood on end, and he felt a strange mix of fear and hope. It was a sensation he couldn't explain. Part of him wanted to run, to leave the cemetery and never look back. Another part wanted to stay, to see if maybe, somehow, it was real. He paused near a row of older gravestones, taking a deep breath. The air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of wet earth and flowers. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to calm himself. "Who's there?" he called out softly. His voice seemed to vanish into the air, swallowed by the vast silence around him. But then it came again, the same soft whisper. "Your name." He froze, his eyes snapping open. The sound was unmistakable. It was a voice he had known all his life, yet he couldn't place it fully. Memories flashed through his mind. His father's laughter, a familiar tone from his childhood. Moments that felt both distant and immediate. His heart raced as the voice repeated his name, clear, patient, and tender. He wanted to believe it was a dream, a trick of the mind, yet the feeling it left was too real. He looked around again, moving slowly, cautiously, as if trying to find the source. Each step felt heavy, his mind swirling with questions. "Is it someone I know?" he wondered. "Or am I losing my mind?" Fear and curiosity battled inside him. He wanted answers, but he also feared what those answers might be. He remembered the days when his father had told him that life could be full of surprises, moments that seemed impossible but carried lessons if one was willing to see them. He had dismissed those words as a child, thinking they were just stories to make him behave or to comfort him during difficult times. Now, standing in the cemetery, hearing a voice that should not exist, those words returned to him with a new weight. The voice came again, this time closer, like it was moving along with him. He turned abruptly, trying to catch a glimpse of someone behind a gravestone or a tree, but there was nothing. Just the empty space, the shadows, the quiet hum of life beyond the cemetery walls. Yet the voice persisted, gentle, calling his name as if urging him to listen, to pay attention. A memory came unbidden, his father teaching him how to listen, how to notice the small things, the subtle signals that others often missed. Maybe this was one of those moments, he thought. Maybe there was something here for him to understand, something he had overlooked all these years. He stopped walking, standing still as the wind whispered through the trees. His breath came in short, uneven gasps, and he felt a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. "Who are you?" he asked again, louder this time. "Show yourself." The cemetery remained silent, the shadows deepening as the sun dipped lower. Yet the feeling of being watched persisted, a presence that was unseen but undeniable. He walked slowly toward an old oak tree, its massive branches stretching wide, casting dark shadows across the graves. The voice came again, clearer than before. "Your name," it said, gently, almost lovingly. He paused, listening intently. There was something familiar, comforting, and yet impossible about it. It wasn't just a voice. It was a connection, a thread that pulled at his heart and memories. He remembered how, as a child, his father had told him that some connections never truly end, that love and presence could linger in ways that were invisible yet deeply felt. Could this be one of those moments? He didn't know. All he knew was that he felt a mix of fear, hope, and longing that he couldn't name. He took another cautious step, then another, moving closer to the source of the sound, even though he couldn't see it. His mind raced with questions. Could it be a friend of his father, someone who knew him? Could it be a stranger with knowledge of his family? Or was it something else, something beyond understanding? The uncertainty both terrified and fascinated him. The voice spoke again, this time with a hint of familiarity, warmth, and a softness that made him feel almost safe. "It's okay," it seemed to say, though no words were spoken, just a tone that wrapped around him, comforting yet mysterious. His heart pounded in his chest, tears threatening to fall once more. He had never felt such a mixture of emotions, fear, hope, grief, longing, all in one moment. He stopped near a gravestone, looking down at the names etched into the stone, thinking about the stories of the people buried there. He wondered if they had felt this before, moments when something unseen touched their lives, something that spoke to them in ways they couldn't explain. He felt a strange kinship with them, a sense that he was not alone in experiencing this unexplainable connection. As he stood there, the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. The shadows stretched longer, merging with the quiet earth around him. The voice came once more, gentle, clear, and unmistakable. He felt a warmth in his chest, a sensation he hadn't felt since his father's passing. It was as if the presence of his father was there, not in body but in spirit, guiding him, comforting him, reminding him that he was never truly alone. He whispered back, almost in disbelief, almost as if speaking aloud could make the impossible real. "I hear you," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I don't understand, but I hear you." The wind seemed to carry his words, mixing them with the faint sound of the voice that had called him. It was a moment suspended in time, where grief and comfort intertwined in a way that made him feel connected to something greater than himself. He sank to the ground, letting the gravel and earth support him, feeling the presence of the voice around him, guiding him, comforting him. He remembered every lesson, every story, every moment his father had shared with him. He thought about the love he had felt, the guidance, the laughter, and even the small disagreements that now seemed so trivial. It was all part of the connection, part of the bond that could never truly be broken. Minutes passed, though he could not say exactly how long. The sun continued to sink and the temperature dropped, but he barely noticed. He was wrapped in the feeling of connection, the strange mixture of reality and memory, of grief and hope. The voice continued softly, a whisper that was more felt than heard, and he felt a sense of calm settle over him. Finally, he stood, brushing the dirt and leaves from his clothes. He looked around, half expecting to see someone emerge from the shadows, but the cemetery remained empty. Yet he knew the voice had been real, in some way that defied explanation. It had touched him, changed him, reminded him of the love that had never left, of the bond that could not be broken by time or absence. He took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of peace mixed with wonder. The voice had come to him at the moment he needed it most, guiding him through the grief, reminding him of the connection he still carried. He knew he would never forget this moment, the whisper of his name, and the feelings it stirred within him. As he walked away from the grave once more, he carried the memory of the voice with him, a quiet, invisible companion. It was a reminder that even in loss there can be unexpected moments of comfort and connection, moments that touch the heart in ways that cannot be fully explained. And though the cemetery returned to its quiet stillness, he felt a warmth in his chest, a sense that he was no longer entirely alone. He was still standing near the gravestone, his heart pounding from the strange encounter. The voice had faded, leaving him with only the echo of his own thoughts and the soft rustling of leaves. He told himself it had been a trick of the mind, a moment of grief creating something that wasn't real. Yet deep down he felt that something or someone had been there. The feeling clung to him, a mix of awe, curiosity, and longing. As he looked around, he noticed movement at the far edge of the cemetery. A figure was emerging from behind a row of older, weathered gravestones. At first he thought it was another visitor, perhaps someone paying respects, but as the figure drew closer, his heart skipped a beat. The person had a familiar presence, one that reminded him of his father in subtle ways. There was a calm confidence, a gentleness, a warmth that made him feel both cautious and comforted at the same time. He didn't know whether to speak or wait, frozen by a mixture of fear and curiosity. The stranger approached slowly, a kind smile on their face, and when their eyes met, he felt a strange familiarity he could not explain. His mind raced through possibilities, wondering if this was someone connected to his father, someone who had known him well. The figure stopped a few feet away, giving him space yet exuding an unspoken understanding. "I didn't mean to startle you," the person said softly. "I didn't expect anyone to be here so late." There was something comforting in the voice, a warmth that made him feel safe despite the lingering mystery. He swallowed hard, trying to find his words. I heard a voice," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was imagining it, but it sounded so familiar." The stranger nodded as if understanding more than words could express. "Sometimes those who leave us never really go," they said. "They find ways to reach us when we need them most. Your father was a special man, and he left many impressions on those who knew him." The young man's eyes widened. "You knew him?" he asked, disbelief and hope mingling in his voice. "Yes," the stranger replied. "I knew him a long time. We worked together, shared stories, and laughed about things only we understood. I also watched him care for you, even from a distance. He loved you more than you know." Tears filled his eyes, a mixture of relief and grief. He wanted to say so much, to ask countless questions, but words felt inadequate. The stranger seemed to sense his thoughts and nodded gently, encouraging him to speak in his own time. They began to walk slowly along the path between the gravestones, talking in soft, quiet tones. The young man asked about his father, about stories he had never heard, moments that had never been shared. The stranger spoke with care, recounting tales of kindness, quiet heroism, and humor that painted a fuller picture of the man he thought he had known, but now realized there was so much more to discover. He listened intently, hanging on every word. The stories brought laughter and tears, sorrow and joy. He learned about moments where his father had helped others in ways he had never known, small acts of bravery and generosity that had gone unnoticed. He learned about the sacrifices he had made, the dreams he had harbored, and the quiet strength that had guided him through life. Each revelation brought him closer to understanding not just his father, but himself. He realized that the love his father had shown, even in small ways, had shaped who he was. The stranger's words painted a living picture, one that made the grief feel lighter, replaced with appreciation and connection. They stopped near another grave, and the stranger pointed to a small worn stone. "Your father would often come here to reflect, to think about life, and to honor those who had touched him. He found peace in quiet moments like this, moments where he could remember what mattered most." He looked at the stone, feeling a kinship with his father he had never felt before. The stranger continued, sharing stories of his father's laughter, his gentle advice, and even his playful teasing. It was like stepping into a world where his father was alive again, not in body, but in spirit and memory. As the conversation continued, he began to feel lighter. The burden of grief that had pressed so heavily on him began to ease, replaced with understanding and warmth. He realized that his father's life had been full, that his love had been present even when he hadn't seen it, and that the lessons he had learned from him were gifts he could carry forward. The stranger spoke of the importance of remembering, of honoring those who had left, and of keeping their memory alive through actions, kindness, and love. He listened carefully, knowing that these words were more than just stories. They were guidance, a map for how to live with grief and yet still embrace life. Hours seemed to pass as they walked and talked, yet time felt suspended. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the cemetery, but neither of them seemed to notice. The young man was caught in the flow of stories, memories, and emotions that brought both comfort and reflection. At one point, the stranger shared a story that made him laugh, a moment of lightness that felt almost impossible in the midst of sorrow. The sound of his own laughter startled him, but it felt good, a reminder that even in grief joy could exist. The stranger smiled knowingly, and in that smile he saw the reflection of his father's warmth and humor. Eventually they stopped by the young man's father's grave again. The stranger knelt, placing a hand lightly on the stone, and spoke words of respect and remembrance. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for this moment, for the chance to connect not only with his father's memory, but also with someone who had truly known him. The young man knelt as well, closing his eyes, letting the stories, the voice, and the memories wash over him. He felt a connection that went beyond words, a bond that included grief, love, and understanding. It was as if he could feel his father's presence through the stranger, through the stories, through the quiet energy that surrounded him. When it was time to leave, the stranger gave him a gentle nod. Remember him, honor him, and carry his lessons forward. He lives in you, and in the way you live your life. The young man felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that while his father was gone in body, he remained very much alive in memory, in guidance, and in love. He walked away slowly, carrying with him the warmth, the stories, and the wisdom shared. The cemetery, once a place of sorrow and solitude, now felt alive with memories, connections, and the presence of those who had shaped his life. The weight on his heart felt lighter, replaced with gratitude and understanding. As he left the cemetery gates behind, he promised himself he would return, that he would continue to remember, to honor, and to share the stories he had heard. The encounter had changed him, leaving him with a sense of hope and connection that he had not expected. He knew that his father's love had never truly left, and that in moments like these, it could be felt more strongly than ever. He stayed at the cemetery long after the stranger had left, sitting quietly beside his father's grave. The air was cooler now, and the shadows stretched long across the ground, but he did not mind. For the first time in many years, he felt a sense of calm, a sense of being connected to something larger than himself. The stories he had heard replayed in his mind, each one painting a fuller picture of his father, of the love and lessons that had been there all along. He thought about all the moments he had missed, the conversations he had never had, the guidance he had longed for. Yet he realized that while his father was no longer alive, the impact of his life was still very present. Every lesson, every memory, every act of kindness was a thread that had been woven into his own life. He began to understand that grief was not just about loss, it was also about holding on to the pieces of someone that shaped who we are. He ran his fingers over the small stone, tracing the letters of his father's name. The texture was rough beneath his fingertips, but grounding. He remembered the stranger saying that remembering was a way to honor someone's life, and he realized that each visit, each memory, each story he carried was a form of living tribute. He had been carrying grief for so long, but he had never truly allowed it to become a bridge to understanding, to connection, to healing. Tears came again, but these were not just tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of recognition, and of acceptance. He felt the weight that had pressed on him for years begin to lift, replaced with a warmth that filled the empty spaces in his heart. He whispered to his father, telling him about the stranger, the stories, the laughter, and the wisdom he had gained. It felt strange to speak to someone who was no longer there, but it also felt natural, necessary. He looked around the cemetery, noticing details he had overlooked before. The soft sway of the flowers in the wind, the subtle patterns of light filtering through the branches, the quiet presence of the graves that surrounded him. It was as if the entire place had shifted, becoming alive with memory and connection. He felt part of something timeless, a continuum of life, love, and remembrance. As he sat there, he reflected on his own life, the challenges he had faced, the mistakes he had made, the moments of triumph and failure. All were part of the journey his father had influenced, often in ways he hadn't recognized. He realized that moving forward did not mean forgetting. It meant carrying those lessons, those memories, and that love with him. It meant living in a way that honored his father, without being weighed down by grief alone. He thought about his own relationships, his friendships, and the ways he interacted with others. He realized that the stories his father had shared through the stranger's words were not just about the past. They were guidance for the present. Compassion, patience, laughter, kindness, and understanding were qualities his father had embodied, and now he had a chance to carry them forward in his own life. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a soft twilight in its place. The cemetery felt quieter, the shadows deeper, yet he felt an inner brightness that hadn't been there before. He stood slowly, brushing the dirt and leaves from his clothes, and felt a sense of renewal. The grief was still there, yes, but it had transformed from a crushing weight into a presence that reminded him of love, connection, and growth. He walked slowly along the path, revisiting the graves he had passed earlier. Each one seemed to whisper stories of its own, echoes of lives lived, of love given, of lessons taught. He felt a kinship with those who had gone before, a sense that life was a series of connections that did not end with death but continued in memory, action, and love. He paused by a small, unassuming stone, reading the name etched there. He imagined the life of the person buried beneath, the joys, the struggles, and the quiet moments that had made them human. It reminded him that every life mattered, that every presence left an imprint, and that remembering was a way to honor that imprint. His father's life had been meaningful, and now he understood that his own life could carry forward that meaning through memory, action, and reflection. He knelt again by his father's grave. Placing a hand lightly on the stone, he felt the coldness of the marble beneath his fingers, but also a warmth in his chest that seemed to radiate from the memories, the stories, and the love that had been shared. He whispered once more, telling his father that he would try to live fully, to carry forward the lessons and to honor the love that had been given. It was a promise not just to his father, but to himself. Hours passed, though he did not notice the time. The sky darkened, stars beginning to appear in the deepening blue. The cemetery was quiet, almost serene, and he felt a connection that transcended time, presence, and absence. It was a feeling of peace, of understanding, of being held by something greater than himself. He realized that the grief he had carried for so long was a part of love, and that love could transform, guide, and sustain him. He reflected on the stranger's words once more, that life could be honored through remembering, through kindness, and through living in ways that reflected the love of those who had gone. He knew now that this was true. Every story, every memory, every act of love he carried forward would be a continuation of his father's life, a way to keep him present, even in absence. He stood, feeling a sense of resolve. The visit had changed him, not in a way that erased grief, but in a way that transformed it into understanding, connection, and hope. He felt stronger, more grounded, and more capable of moving forward without losing the essence of his father's influence. The love he had received, the lessons he had learned, and the memories he carried were now tools for living fully, for honoring what had been given, and for sharing it with others. As he made his way to the cemetery gates, he paused one last time, looking back at the graves, at the quiet rows of stones, and at the memory of the stranger who had shared so much with him. He felt a sense of gratitude, not just for the stories, but for the experience of connection, of understanding, and of healing. It was a gift he would carry with him forever. He left the cemetery with a new awareness, a recognition that life, love, and grief were intertwined. The lessons he had learned, the stories he had heard, and the presence he had felt would guide him in ways he could not yet fully see. And though the night was falling, he felt a quiet light within himself, a sense that he could move forward, honor his father, and continue to grow with love and memory as his guide. He promised himself that he would return, that he would continue to sit by the grave, to speak, to remember, and to honor. He understood now that grief could be a bridge, not a barrier. It could connect him to love, to memory, and to the lessons that shaped him. And in that understanding, he found a peace that had eluded him for years, a peace that would remain with him as he moved forward in life. He walked back through the cemetery slowly, the cool evening air brushing against his face. The sun had set, leaving only a soft glow in the sky, the fading light reflecting off the stones and trees around him. He felt lighter than when he had arrived, a weight lifted from his chest, replaced with a quiet understanding. The stories he had heard, the voice he had felt, and the memories of his father had all woven together into a sense of peace he had not known for years. As he moved past the rows of graves, He noticed small details he had missed before. The delicate flowers that had bloomed despite the cold, the subtle curve of an old stone, the way the wind moved through the branches creating a soft melody of rustling leaves. Each small detail reminded him that life continued, that beauty existed even in quiet, unexpected places. He felt that his father's presence lingered here, not in spirit alone, but in every story, every memory, and every gentle reminder the world offered. He paused near a gravestone that was not his father's, reading the names engraved on it. He imagined the lives of those buried there, their joys, struggles, and moments of love. He realized that every life left an imprint, that every person who had ever touched the world had left a piece behind. His father had done the same, leaving behind love, lessons, and memories that shaped him into who he was. He felt gratitude for that imprint and understood that he could honor it by living fully, carrying forward the kindness and values his father had taught. The stranger's words echoed in his mind, reminding him that remembering and sharing stories kept a person alive in the hearts of others. He realized that this was not just about grief, but about connection, about carrying forward a life that had meaning. He thought of the times he had been lost, the moments when he had felt alone, and now he understood that those moments were not empty. They were filled with the echoes of love and guidance, shaping him in ways he could now recognize. He knelt, again by his father's grave, feeling the coolness of the stone beneath his hands and let the memories wash over him. He whispered words of thanks, telling his father that he would carry the lessons, the love, and the guidance forward in his life. He spoke of hope, of growth, and of moving forward while keeping the memory alive. The act of speaking, of connecting, even in absence, brought him a deep sense of comfort and closure. He realized that closure did not mean forgetting, nor did it mean that grief would disappear. Instead, closure meant understanding, acceptance, and a readiness to carry the love forward. He thought about how he could honor his father not only by remembering him but by living in ways that reflected the values he had learned. Compassion, honesty, laughter, resilience, and kindness were the gifts he now intended to share with the world, just as his father had done in his life. He stood slowly, brushing dirt and leaves from his hands, and felt a shift within himself. The quiet of the cemetery no longer felt heavy or isolating. Instead, it felt alive with memory, connection, and a sense of enduring presence. He could feel the love that had guided him for so long, a love that was now transformed into understanding and courage. He knew that life would continue to challenge him, to bring moments of doubt and sorrow, but he also knew he had the strength to carry them forward with grace and memory. He walked along the path toward the exit, taking in the sights and sounds of the night. The air was filled with quiet whispers, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, the soft movement of small creatures in the grass. Each sound reminded him that life was continuous, that every ending was also a beginning. He felt connected to something larger, something timeless where love, memory, and presence could persist beyond absence. As he reached the gates of the cemetery, he looked back one last time. The rows of stones, the soft shadows, and the quiet beauty of the place seemed to glow with meaning. He felt a deep gratitude for the experiences of the day, the voice that had reached him, the stranger who had shared stories, and the memories that had come alive in a new, vivid way. Each had left a mark on him, shaping his understanding of life, loss, and connection. He took a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill his lungs, and felt a sense of readiness. He was ready to face life with a renewed heart, to honor his father in the choices he made, in the love he shared, and in the way he carried himself. He knew that grief would return at times, as it always does, but now it carried a different weight, one that reminded him of love, guidance, and presence rather than absence alone. He promised himself he would continue to visit, to speak, to remember, and to honor. He would carry the stories forward, share the lessons, and ensure that his father's influence remained alive not just in memory, but in action. He understood now that living fully and with purpose was the ultimate way to honor someone who had shaped him so profoundly. The night deepened and he walked through the quiet streets beyond the cemetery, each step lighter than before. He reflected on the journey of the day, the emotions he had experienced, and the profound sense of connection that had emerged. It was a reminder that life, love, and memory are intertwined, that grief is part of love and that presence can be felt even when someone is gone. He felt a subtle, unspoken connection with his father, a sense that he was still watching over him, guiding him in small, invisible ways. He smiled softly, feeling warmth in his chest, knowing that the lessons, the love, and the stories would continue to shape him. Each step forward was a step taken with intention, with memory, and with love. As he reached his home, he paused at the door, reflecting on the day's experiences. The encounter had been transformative, showing him the depth of connection, the power of memory, and the enduring nature of love. He knew that life would continue to bring challenges, moments of doubt and moments of sorrow, but he also knew he had the strength and insight to navigate them with grace, grounded in the love and lessons of his father. He entered his home quietly, carrying with him the peace of the cemetery, the warmth of the stories, and the connection that had been awakened. He knew that the journey of life would continue, filled with ups and downs, but he felt prepared to meet it with a heart full of understanding, compassion, and presence. The memory of his father was no longer a source of only sorrow. It was a guiding light, a source of inspiration, and a wellspring of strength. He sat by the window, looking at the stars above, reflecting on the profound lessons he had learned. He understood now that life is a series of connections, of love that persists, of lessons that continue beyond presence. The grief he had carried for so long had transformed into understanding, and the sorrow had given way to appreciation, memory, and hope. He whispered quietly, as if speaking to his father directly, "I will remember, I will honor, and I will carry forward what you taught me. I will live with love, kindness, and purpose, and I will make the most of the life you helped shape." The words brought a deep sense of calm and a feeling of closeness that he had not felt in years. Finally, he leaned back, closing his eyes, letting the emotion settle. The journey through grief, memory, and connection had brought him to a place of understanding, peace, and readiness. He knew the path ahead would have challenges, but he also knew that he carried his father's lessons, love, and presence within him, guiding him in every step he took. And in that quiet moment, he felt whole again, not in the absence of grief, but in the presence of love, memory, and the enduring connection that could never be broken.